Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
In the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back to the AP Strange Show. My friends, it's a very special show tonight. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Marty K. Ultra's subliminal messaging service. Are you looking to get a new job? Perhaps you're not happy with your place in life and people around you won't fall in line. Let Marty K's do the work for you. Make every candidate in your life a Manchurian one with Marty K's. For those interested parties, check them out online. Just Google Marty K's subliminal messaging service and psychic driver education. So tonight on this show, we're doing something a little different. Different for me, certainly, because I have a general rule of thumb, which is I always prioritize things that I'm very enthusiastic about, things that I love. And if I'm going to talk about a book like I do on my YouTube series, that's a little plug for my own series on YouTube, which is separate from the show. I usually like to show books that make me laugh or make me happy. And I got a book today that makes me sad and angry. And that book is Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon by David McGowan, which is one that people seem to really revere. I mean, it is controversial, but people seem to revere it. And our guest tonight to help me walk through this with me is the only man I would trust with this job. And somebody, I almost feel bad for stringing along through all this weird scenery with me, but that man is no stranger to paranoia, conspiracy, and synchronicity and craziness, because he is one half of the host of the mind-blowing podcast, The Nonsense Bazaar, currently on hiatus, but it will become something else. He's a writer, a musician, and a wonderful human being, and a very funny guy. Please welcome Sequoyah Kennedy.
Why did we do this?
Why did we do this?
Why did we decide to do this?
See, I'm the kind of guy that will watch a terrible movie and be like,
Yeah.
what am I doing with my life? But then at the end of it, I laugh about it. I'm like, that was terrible, but it was great. But with this book, it's a totally different thing.
Yeah, man. I mean, yeah, I have been trying so hard to get conspiracy pilled. That's why I started reading this in the first place. Like, to be perfectly honest, I want things to be simpler. I do. I want things to be simpler. I want to be scared a little bit. I want to have an enemy. This is the dumbest thing I've ever read in my life. But thank you for having me on the show. First of all, like that, I appreciate it, and this will be fun. Welcome. But God damn it, like I was listening to the audiobook, and I can tell the reader was getting tired, and he was like trying to overplay the skeptical conspiracy theory cadence in every sentence he was reading. And it was just like, I really love some deep paranoia stuff, but this thing is it's just frustrating. Yeah.
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like if you're familiar with the writings of, say, Jim Keith, or stuff that like Adam Parfrey wrote back in the 90s, or like, classic conspiracy stuff of the 90s, and then you go read this, it's like not the same thing.
It's not yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That other stuff, I mean, you could argue the merits of it, but stylistically it's got a very definite voice with stuff that does seem pretty strange. And then when you read McGowan, it's like conversational, sarcastic, and meandering, and you're kind of like, well, what exactly I mean, that's the main thing here. What is this book about? Because it's not really clear.
Well, ostensibly, it's about the Laurel Canyon music scene in the 1960s, the hippie movement, and whether there was something darker, weirder, more conspiratorial going on with the entirety of all the musicians who came out of the Laurel Canyon scene.
Right. And
Right?
some movie stars. Yeah.
And some movie
But
stars. The whole LA art scene based out
yeah,
of Laurel Canyon.
yeah, so this book loomed large in my world as something that just people would mention, right? I don't know if it was the same for you, but it was the kind of thing where you'd be listening to an interview with somebody and like a 60s musician would come up and they're like, "Oh, well, it's like that book that McGowan wrote." Or they'd be talking about LA and they're like, "Oh, there was that weird scenes book that McGowan
Yeah.
wrote." And so I mean, just from context, I always thought that there must be something in this book that connects the Laurel Canyon scene directly to like MK Ultra or at
Yeah.
least the CIA or some controlling arm that of the government that we haven't heard of or something. But
Something.
he never really makes clear what he's even accusing people of in this book.
That's the problem. Because like, yo, I totally like I'm not the guy to sit here and say like, oh, history's been solved. You know, we know everything that's ever happened. We know everyone. We have a clear list of good guys and bad guys. None of the good guys ever did anything bad, and there's no such thing as a secret plot. Like, of course not. Like, there are absolutely secret plots, but you can't just say it doesn't sound like these three guys. They don't sound like good guys. It means they must have been involved with something not good together, which is like essentially what he just does over and over again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's so vague as to be completely ridiculous. Now, if this was a book that was just like, here's a bunch of weird stuff and dark stories about that scene that maybe you didn't know, that would
Right.
be one thing. But the implication seems to be that there's like a sinister manufactured um, counterculture that informed the San Francisco scene, which I might add is rife with MK Ultra influences directly. Like people
Yeah.
admittedly
Yeah.
involved in
Yeah. Yeah.
experimentation there.
Did he
But
mention Jolly West once in the fucking book?
I don't think so. He doesn't
Right.
mention
Like
Robert Hunter or Ken Kesey or not once.
that's yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Not once. And it's like, I mean,
And he has like a whole half of a chapter about Owsley, but like
right.
doesn't mention those people.
I mean, the thing Tom O'Neill's Chaos is a much better example of how to do something like this, like the Manson
Right.
stuff, and he doesn't come to any like solid conclusions either, but there's like specifics and he documents things, and there's just like, oh yeah, that is really really fucked up. Like, okay, I don't know if his conclusions are correct, such as they are, but like it's the form of the thing, it's the actual presenting of like this is weird. Here's why it's weird. Here's the evidence. You know, and then I can't draw any conclusions. Whereas, I mean, it seems like, well, it seems like the premise of Weird Scenes is that the counterculture was created as, sort of controlled opposition, a fake opposition to the Vietnam War. That seems to be what it is, like a
Yeah, in order to discredit the more legitimate anti-war movement or something.
yeah, or something, yeah. And
Because it's never clear who's in control or how they benefit from it anywhere in the book. I kept waiting for that to happen, and then the last chapter just kind of peters out and starts talking about Houdini for some reason. And and then there's a chapter about how the police are probably spooks, like the band The
yeah.
Police. And
Well, you know, Sting bought a castle, so there's
yeah, I mean, nobody gets that good at the drums in their garage either,
this is
so
true. This is true. Yeah, it's like man, well, first of all, who's behind it? It's Lucifer. First of
oh,
all,
yeah,
yeah,
right.
and I mean, it's just to get it out of the way. The thing that pisses me off more than I think anything is just like anything that has the flavor of the occult. He calls Luciferian, right? Like
Oh,
shaman,
yeah, I
like
noticed that.
Jim
Yeah.
Morrison's interest in shamanism, that's Luciferian. Aleister
Right.
Crowley, that's Luciferian and shit. And it's like, look, I get that you can think that all of this shit is bad, but they are not the same thing. They're not the
Yeah.
same thing, like even a little bit. Like Luciferianism, if to define it, I guess, in it such as you can, it would be sort of like the idea that man can become God, right? Like the idea that we
Right.
can,
Right.
have through ultimate technological progress and stealing fire from fucking heaven, we can become God.
Yeah. The
Shamanism,
Promethean idea. Yeah.
yeah. Shamanism is about like letting the trees talk to you and shit.
Right.
Entirely different things.
Yeah, and Luciferianism is distinct from Satanism as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
Where Satanism is about like, especially LaVeyan Satanism is about like hedonism,
yeah.
and is atheological. And it's just like you can't just call every Aleister Crowley is Aleister Crowley. Like he has a
Hmm.
whole system and set of beliefs and stuff, and like there's a dogma within the layman shit. Like you can't just call it something else. But especially you can't just call it something else from the jump. Never explain why you're doing it, never explain why it's Luciferian. You just work with that assumption, which then leads, well, if these all people, they're all Luciferians, as we've already established, so they must be working together. And it's like, yo, your entire shit has fallen apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that gets to just uh, I mean this book, you just don't even know where to start.
You
I
really don't.
I did mean to preface this with, in listening to your entire catalog on the Nonsense Bazaar with your co-host Willow, if you listen to these, what you'll notice, and I hope, is what I noticed when I listened, and I was very impressed because I didn't know Sequoyah or Willow at all at the time. Um, and listening to it, it's like you, Sequoyah, have a knack for nuance, and so did Willow. Like just picking things apart and like figuring out what things are before you make like declarative statements about them. And it's like I see a lot of people jump to conclusions or do just the surface level baseline research of stuff. And I was always so impressed at the way um, uh, both of you, when you were trying to investigate a character like somebody like Madame Blavatsky, or if you
Yeah.
were talking about like Solomonic magic, or whatever it was that you were investigating that week, I knew that you guys had done due diligence. You've left the door open for possibility, and there's a lot of nuance, and you're not. I mean, with few with few exceptions, you're not making like you're not discarding stuff, and you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater ever. And
With few exceptions.
yeah, and this guy here, David
Yeah.
David McGowan, does the complete opposite. He just finds
Yeah.
things that are weird and mentions it and lets it hang there and
Well,
strongly insinuates that there's something sinister behind it, but never tells you what that is. You
right.
know?
I mean, he uses weird as the linking principle between these things.
Right.
And like to me, I don't know. I want to, first of all, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I've definitely gotten a lot of shit wrong,
Well,
but
I
I
mean
like to,
what I say, because like even so, I mean, if you even if you did get stuff wrong, I mean, I didn't always agree with everything you said, but you always left the door open, and you said
yeah,
I there are tons of times you would say I could be wrong, but this is my sense of it. You're very
yeah,
clear about that, as opposed to somebody like McGowan that's just like, oh, sure, people just hang themselves all the time,
right.
Yeah,
Or like, yeah, dude, houses in California burn down and shit. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like,
yeah.
it's really dry,
There's a lot of
Is it
droughts there. Yeah.
like, and people, and the thing is, I mean, with a lot of these guys, so much of it is explained by, yeah, drugs fuck up people's heads a lot. Like
Hmm.
that's just kind of a thing. Like drugs and the partying lifestyle. Like it's I don't know. I don't know. Should we like talk about some of the cases that he
Yeah, oh,
brings?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I've got a ton of dog-eared pages, and
Hell yeah.
we can start literally anywhere in here just because this book is a giant pile of nonsense anyway. But
Well, let's start with Jim Morrison.
okay, cool, because that's one place I wanted to go
Yeah.
because when I first read this book, this was the chapter where I stopped and closed the book, put it down, took a deep breath, and walked away from it.
Yeah.
And it was a while before I came back. Because, I mean, with Morrison, I think everybody that's even remotely into conspiracy weird shit knows that his father was the admiral at the Gulf of Tonkin. And
Yes.
that's kind of the one little factoid that McGowan has that seems to, out of any of these characters, tie them directly to anything. Is the
And
fact that
even
Jim
that
Morrison's
is a
dad.
little contentious,
Right.
in terms of like what type of admiral his ass was, how much, control or influence he really had. I mean, it seems like some, for sure. But
Or how close Jim Morrison was with his dad.
that's the thing. He
Right.
uses the fact that Morrison never denounced his father or talked about him at all as evidence that there was something he was trying to hide or that he was somehow involved in a plot. And it's like, or maybe it's what it seems like on the surface, which is he came from a military family, like everyone at the time, uh, rebelled and hated his dad and didn't want to talk about him. Or just didn't
Yeah.
want that. I don't want to, as any type of artist, you're not going to talk about your parents. Like,
Yeah.
just from a fucking branding perspective, you're not going to do that.
I think we just skipped over something really important here, though, is that all of these artists, he says, have ties to the military slash intelligence community, by which he means they're related to somebody that was in the military or intelligence or industry that's tangential to the military or
Yeah.
like the mafia or there's so many things that fit under this umbrella that he calls the military intelligence community, and all you need is a direct relationship to one of them. But
Right.
mainly it's military in this book.
Yes.
Now, what era were all of these stars? What generation would you say these rock stars came from? The baby boom, the baby boomers, which is
The
all people. Yeah, baby boomers, the people that were born out of couples after World War II.
they
It's really
came
not
home.
that weird.
They came home and started banging. It's that's and then a lot of them and
That's where the
those
term comes
kids,
from.
those kids were the ones in the middle class that had like kind of the safety net and the freedom to become artists and shit and also they were had the thing to rebel against probably and
Right, military brats didn't would
yeah,
get sick of it after a while, want to leave that kind of lifestyle, right?
yeah, like that's just like you can take a sampling of any group of people from that time period and like do the same thing with them. Like
Yeah, I
literally
mean,
any yeah.
my dad's a boomer, and his dad was on Omaha Beach at D-Day. Like
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, my grandfather was at was on he was artillery at Okinawa, There's
Right.
something, and like that connection would be enough to be mentioned at least. Maybe not, maybe McGowan wouldn't hang his hat on it, but it'd be mentioned in
Oh
that
well,
as like this.
my dad was also in the Navy, so I mean, I would be screwed.
Oh,
He was in
yeah.
the silent service in the 70s on a sub, so
Well, a
I'm in deep
submarine, you
spook
say?
water. Yeah, I'm in deep
Yeah.
spook waters here.
Hey, man, my last name's Kennedy, so
Yeah, well,
my first
direct
name's
ties to
weird,
Camelot.
you know?
Yeah, yeah. Only
Yeah.
like the fifth most common Irish name in the world.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Whether I want to be one of those Kennedys or not, because sometimes I'm like, well, they have money, but then other times I'm just like, yeah, but they're either all dead or they have brainworms. So I think
Yeah.
I'm good being this Kennedy, being poor
Yeah,
swamp Kennedy. It's fine.
yeah. I think you're better off.
I think so
Um,
too.
but I mean, that's the level of laziness we're dealing with here. Is like, well, her dad was in the military.
Yeah.
His dad was in the military, and so I mean, that's enough for McGowan to say, well, that's pretty weird, right? Like, I think right in the beginning of the book, in the preface, he says sometimes it really is about pattern seeking. Like, if a certain
Mm-hmm.
number of the people involved in the scene all have ties to the military, like that must mean something. And it's like, no, it doesn't. And since you never
Awesome.
spell out what it means or what I'm supposed to believe it means, then I can't believe that you believe it means anything.
I think he does, and that this is the thing. Maybe this is just the right time to talk about it. So, like, I reading that
Sure.
preface, like, I was like, "Oh shit, I get what's going on." Because he lays it out. He says, like, "Look, after I wrote Program to Kill, which I haven't read, I imagine the fallacies are the same, but I also think that there's probably, well, I mean, you know what? Even in this story, like, there is dark shit. He's taught
Right.
like there is dark shit, and Program to Kill being about like MK Ultra, which is real as fuck, and like
Mhm.
serial killers and stuff. Like he says, like, basically, like, I fried my brain. I was in a
Yeah.
bad headspace, and I needed to get away from that headspace. I took a vacation. My daughter bought me this book, and I thought it was just some light reading material about the bands I loved. And then I started reading it on the beach, and all of a sudden I started seeing these patterns and stuff. He
Yeah.
had gotten himself into a paranoid headspace where he literally just started seeing it. And at the same time, I think we're looking at a guy getting disillusioned about the bands that he loves and like not understanding
Right.
how the music industry has ever worked. And he's in the paranoid headspace, and then he just got exposed to this, material and attacked it from the same perspective that he desperately needed a vacation from, in his own words.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, so I think he definitely believed it. It's just that he was I don't know, he shouldn't have been
Well, yeah,
reading anything. Books will
yeah, I mean, he seems
books
to
will
have a
drive you
certain
nuts.
he seems to have an obsession with violence too, because I mean, as much as he said he was taking a vacation from it in that book, I mean, he was also writing a blog the whole time. And this
Right.
book is composed a lot out of his blog entries. This all came from his blog originally.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah, yeah, a lot of this was online, and readers helped point him in the right direction to fill it out a little bit more. So the readers of his blog at the time, I guess, are just as guilty.
It's feedback loops on feedback loops.
Right. And at the time he was writing about things like the Boston Marathon bombing, which
Yeah.
he was saying was a false flag attack with crisis actors. And I'm not sure, but I think that might be the first time you hear the term crisis actors with a major event like that.
I'm
Uh,
not sure. I feel like he didn't invent that term, but I only recently became aware that there was even like this, like, that narrative about the Boston Marathon bombings. Because, like,
yeah, me too. But
yeah,
when I found out, I'm like, oh, it makes
yeah,
sense
yeah,
entirely that it was McGowan.
yeah.
He was also the original 9/11 truther because he was posting about how well, he was posting about the conspiracy element around that within hours of the towers falling down.
Right. Which
So,
is like, it's fucking
first
ghoulish.
in
I mean,
line. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, like, especially like the Boston Marathon, like, yo, come on. Like, a friend of mine was working at the finish line. Like, really?
Yeah.
Really? There wasn't any real bombs there? You sure about that, bub?
Yeah,
Are you
people in New
fucking kidding
England.
me? Like,
Right. But, yeah, so, I mean, this is the level we're dealing with, but
yeah.
just I really do want to underline how stupid the book is to people because the reason it's important is because I hear this name invoked nowadays, or at least hear about it being invoked by younger generations who are taking what he says and running with it. And I feel like it bears repeating that everything he thinks is weird is really not that weird.
It's really not
Um,
that weird.
he thinks he thinks session musicians and house bands at studios is signs of a conspiracy. He thinks that's weird, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Like the
That
fact
they
that
that
these bands didn't play on their own records, but they were session musicians doing that.
No, dude, that's business. And that's what I
That's
mean
just
about him being disillusioned with the music he loves. Like, yeah, the music industry's brutal. Like, it sucks. It's not
right.
what it sells itself as. Some of these people are assholes. Some of these people are
Yeah.
really bad people. Um, Especially like the business side of things. And like, there are, quote unquote conspiracies throughout woven throughout all the entire entertainment industry,
Mhm.
for sure. But like,
Most of them are designed at making money or
yeah,
protecting assets, you know?
And it's like, again, if it's one thing, that one thing is just, it's capitalism. It's
Right.
business. It's, yeah. And like, so he talks about like, the Laurel Canyon death list, he calls it, which is just like, you know, the untimely and mysterious deaths that are associated with all the people in Laurel Canyon, like Lenny Bruce, Raymond Navarro, Salmoneo, Diane Linkletter. Uh, it's just like all these people died in this one area. Isn't that weird? No.
No,
It's
because
like,
they all
no.
lived in that area. So
Yeah. And they were all like doing drugs and like partying and shit. Like that's the thing.
it was
Um,
a wild scene, man. That was rife. It was like
yeah,
it's like I can't believe that this laboratory full of explosives blew up when people were running around in it recklessly, you know?
exactly. I mean, it's the same thing with like the death of Jack Parsons, right? It's like,
Yeah,
no, there doesn't have to be a conspiracy when he was really bad with safety procedures and like going through drug withdrawals and shit. Like you drop things
yeah.
sometimes. Like,
Rolling the dice with his experiments every time, you know? Like
yeah, like it's gonna come up snake eyes sometimes. Like,
and it's the same thing with drugs. I mean,
yeah,
especially then,
yeah,
you're talking about like especially because he doesn't narrow down like the time and place he's talking about as much as he claims he does. Because some of the events he's describing take place like 2 decades after.
yeah,
Like, everything's popping off, and you're just like, it but I mean, suffice to say, when you got drugs in the mix, he seems to find it very weird that there was crime in the mix, and it's like, drugs are illegal, man. Of course, there were, like, criminals around,
right.
because who are you gonna get the drugs from?
And then, of course, there's criminal elements that have business connections to the music industry because the music industry needs the drugs in the scene to make the product, and should
Yeah.
thus they need to have partnerships with the criminals and shit. I mean,
This
like,
is all very well documented, like, seedy behavior in the entertainment industry that most of
yeah,
us just accept if we're not completely rubes, you know?
yeah. And
Like,
if you've ever like been in a band that like tried to play that played shows and was like like even on like a you know a micro scale, like I used to play in Providence and stuff, and like you see the same thing just on a smaller scale because it's just like these are the patterns of behavior that like that type of scene ends up, engendering. Like,
yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted to go there with you because you and I both have, a history with music and entertainment
yeah,
and performing in smaller scenes, small local scenes. And in reading about Laurel Canyon, I'm like, this reminds me of when I was in my early 20s and I worked at a cafe and it was a small hole in the wall kind of place and like all kinds of weirdo type musicians would come through and there was a scene around it and there were people that overlapped. um Not that weird if you've ever been in any kind of arts scene.
right,
But
right. Just on a smaller scale, but it's because you can see it on that smaller scale that you're able to, extrapolate that out. Like, oh, I've actually seen this before. This just seems like that, but like with more at stake, you know?
mhm, yeah. But
And then,
not even really like at first, because before these bands
right,
blew up, you know, it was just like he thinks it's so weird that they all gravitated to the same area, but also talks about how like Frank Zappa's home was like a big commune, and like Mama Cass's house was just an open door place where people could wander in and out and crash on the couch. It's
right,
like, well, dude, it's really not weird that they all lived in the same area because if they rolled into town, they had a free place to stay if they went there.
right.
And they already knew each other. It's like, I don't really know why this is weird to you.
Yeah,
So,
like we a bunch of bands, like a couple bands that I was in, and then a couple other bands, we used to rent this practice space at
mhm,
what was once like an old mill with some businesses, and it was in the back of like a storage unit place in the back of this mill, and it was right next to the local ghost hunter slash music teacher slash paranormal author Tom DiAgostino's office at the time, literally in the
mhm.
same storage unit place. And it was also in the same building as a coffin factory. And
Wow.
like Yeah, and so like we used to be coupled right next door to an occultist's office and a coffin factory. Like maybe like 20 of us that like we'd show up there at 3 in the morning on
Yeah.
drugs and be there for maybe 2 days. What were we doing there? Isn't that weird?
Right. Isn't that
Isn't
weird?
that weird?
And I'm sure if there were musicians that you knew from another town and they came into town to play a show, they might need a place to crash,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that might be your couch.
Oftentimes has been. Yeah.
That would be weird though. It's real weird that was
I mean,
happening.
it was weird for sure. But like not like that.
It's anti-structure, right? If you're an artist, you're comfortable with some level of anti-structure and chaos,
Yeah.
And this is something that McGowan just can't wrap his mind around, I guess.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
really everything is very sus, as the kids say these
As the
days.
kids say these days, yeah. Which is that's interesting too, because like I mean, I haven't been a kid for a long time, but like just in my own life, I've definitely noticed more of a there's less anti-structure as a general mode of being amongst like few less people are less structured than I remember them being.
Hmm.
Again, especially like kids aren't doing the same shit they used to be. I mean, like
Oh,
younger
absolutely not. Yeah.
yeah. Um, it's a safer, more we're moving to a more repressive age. And I wonder if it's just like, it's just like a lack of understanding of like how Wild West things used to be. Like
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
maybe, but like McGowan should know. He
Yeah.
should. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is I guess he would have been more Gen X, right? But
Yeah.
um so he was what, just barely 60 when he died?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Something like that, yeah. So, I mean, he was like a baby at the tail end of the 60s, maybe,
Right. Right.
or,
Right.
or early 70s. So, like, he wasn't around for any of this stuff. But, I mean, his parents would have been, I don't really, it's almost like, how are you that disconnected from the past that most of us are familiar with just from, I don't know, watching documentaries or movies from that time,
Right.
like,
Right. Right. Right.
well, all right. Back to Jim Morrison though, just because this
Right.
is
Yes.
my favorite passage of the book. This is the part that made me put it down is he says, like, here we have a guy who had never sang, who had never even conceived in scare quotes of the notion that he could open his mouth and make sounds come out, who couldn't play an instrument and had no interest in learning such a skill, and who had never much listened to music or even been anywhere near a band, even just to watch one perform, and yet he somehow emerged virtually overnight as a fully formed rock star who would quickly become an icon of his generation. And even more bizarrely, legend holds that he brought with him enough original songs to fill the first few Doors albums. Morrison did not, you see, do as other singer-songwriters do and pen songs over the course of a band's career. Instead, he allegedly wrote them all at once before the band was even formed. As Jim once acknowledged in an interview, he was not a very prolific songwriter. Most of the songs I've written, I wrote in the beginning about 3 years ago. I just had a period where I wrote a lot of songs. And he goes on to describe how weird it is that Jim Morrison, who doesn't play any instruments, or have any interest in music or any musical training could write all the Doors songs.
Hmm.
When if you look at any Doors album, it has writing credits attached to
Hmm.
each song. And you'll
Hmm.
notice that 95% of those are credited to all of the band members.
Right.
Everybody's name's on it.
Yeah.
Never has it ever been claimed by anybody, regardless of this legend that he says uh, happened, that Jim Morrison like handed out sheet music to the rest of the guys, and he's like, here's our whole catalog, guys, let's go.
Right. And like,
Because that's not how music works, and that's not
and
how bands work.
he belabors this point too. Like
Yeah, it goes on for pages.
it
He's
goes
like,
on for pages.
I think he
He
even says like, now I'm no musician.
he
Yeah, I'm
does,
certainly
yeah.
no musician myself. But it's my understanding that just about every singer-songwriter composes songs on an instrument or like, that was my deep breath, put the book down, walk away from it moment because I'm like,
Straight up though. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what that
He was a
tells me is I
poet.
can't. Yeah, right. He had a book of poems, like crappy
Yeah.
poems that he wrote, like a lot of angsty youths do.
Yeah, those were his songs. He brought poetry to him and then he just called them songs in interviews afterwards because they became songs and made him a bunch of money and so they're songs now. But yeah.
I mean, ostensibly, what's the difference between a song and a poem? It's just got music behind it.
Yeah.
You don't even
I
need
mean,
music behind it for it to be a song. Like
that's
you could
true.
argue they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Because I did both. I mean, they could be either, you know?
I write a lot more poetry now because I hate rhyming. I've
Yeah.
just the older I
It's
get,
nice
it's
to
just
be
more
free
like,
form with it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Like, I don't know that I can trust his judgment on anything else in the book if that's his take on the Doors.
Right. I mean, there's things where it's like, if you were convinced of the, Luciferian satanic plot to fucking warp everyone's minds and shit, he goes into Vito Polikis, the
Mm.
hippie, uh,
The
leader
proto
of a
hippie,
band
I
of
guess.
hippies,
Yeah.
um, and how Vito and his freakers. And he talks about how when their infant son died, like they, Vito and his girlfriend and his son's mother went out dancing that night on a head full of acid. And it's like, yeah, dude, one, people process grief real fucking weird. Two, hippies weren't great. Like,
No, yeah.
like that was
Like, I
kind
mean, I
of
guess yeah. I guess that's kind of his point, is like he's demolishing the idea that they were all about peace, love, and understanding. He uses this phrase a bunch of times. And it's
yeah.
just kind of like, all right, but it seems like it seems like Dave here is conveniently using the term counterculture of the 60s as a monolithic presence that's best exemplified by Laurel Canyon, and then showing how it's actually not, though. And
Yeah.
he's like picky and choosy about what he means when he talks about 60s counterculture. Like it's one and the same with the anti-war movement sometimes, and then other times it's not. Like every time he thinks something is weird, he later thinks something else is weird that balances out the other thing he thinks is weird.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's so hard to describe, and I was describing this book as being mental sandpaper because the more I read it, the smoother my brain started to feel.
No, it's a uniquely frustrating and angering book if you have
Right.
any experience in music at all. It's like I can
Or
usually
in
get
life.
down or in life, yeah. I mean, probably like the thing is like every time I like just got really angry, it was because I was just like, dude, that's not how the music industry works. That's not how any of this shit works. So like, I have that lens going
Right.
through it. It's mm,
Well, it's almost like lies by omission or allowing implication and readers to draw their own conclusions based on just random shit you said, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's also like sour grapes too. It's like he's angry the at two things at once. At like one, there was parties he didn't get invited to, and
Yeah.
two, that he idolized. He bought into the thing they were selling him. He bought
Mhm.
into the vibe, the American rock and roll vibe that these people were selling him, and he's really upset that that turned out to be complete bullshit.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, sorry, man. Like, I don't know. Like, it's kind of been common knowledge. Like, people that are, most people that are really into this music, like, they're the ones who know better than anyone else the seedier underside of it. And like, the fact that like Frank Zappa was probably an asshole to be in a band with. Like, I wouldn't want to be part of his band.
Right.
But he uses like that, someone's interview, like calling Zappa totalitarian. And how strange it was that like he stayed at a different hotel than the rest of his band as somehow like sinister. And it's like, nah, dude, That man wrote sheet music for his band. Like he was a. Have you have the the band
Well, Dave McGowan thinks all bands write out the sheet music for.
Yeah, right.
He
The
thinks Jim
band.
Morrison and Frank Zappa sat in a room together smoking cigarettes with
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a
yeah,
council
yeah.
of 13 at the time, like
Owsley
writing.
Stanley dosing him up on intravenous LSD and telling him what
Right.
the alien overlord said to write. But it's
Yeah.
like I went to the high school I went to, the band director before the one I had, uh took our school to the international uh high school band competition in Vienna.
Mhm.
And they won so hard. This is like 1995. They won so hard that they didn't award second and third place. There was just first play. That's it. Like you
Mhm.
guys were in another league. Now, Nito Pandolfi is another guy I would never want to be in his band because they had to practice 6 a.m. every single day of the week.
Yep.
Sometimes weekend practices. He was known to throw chairs at kids when they messed up. Like,
Mhm.
like if you make a mistake, he might just get mad and throw a chair at you. But he made
Yeah.
him so good that they won the international high school band competition in 1995 or somewhere around there. Um, yeah, band leaders are sometimes psychopaths. Like that. I
Yeah. I
mean,
mean, it's kind
that
of like
there's that
that
movie
that
Whiplash,
recording,
you know?
right? That recording of Buddy Rich, the jazz drummer. Have you ever heard
Mm,
that? Where he's
no
chewing out the I'll see if I can clip a little bit of it into the show, but
word.
it's on YouTube. You can find Buddy Rich just yelling at the band on the bus.
I gotta go up there and be embarrassed by you motherfuckers. I play with the greatest fucking musicians in the world. How dare you play like that for me? How dare you try to play like that for me? Asshole. I get 15 fucking kids in rehearsal. The fucking time of this band is incredible. We don't play two fucking bars in one fucking tempo. Not one. You can't keep fucking time and play. There's too many things to do, isn't there? You can't pat your fucking foot and play. You're all over the fucking place. Missed you after missed you.
And it was like a trumpet player came in late or something, and he
Yeah,
just chews them out. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, band leaders, uh, like Frank Zappa was a composer first and
yeah, 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 yeah.
foremost in his head. He thought of himself as an avant-garde composer.
100%.
He was also a surrealist and a satirist and a rock guitar player. These were all
Yes.
distinct things that he was. But in McGowan's mind, people aren't multifaceted. They
Right.
present one way, and then there must be a secret hand guiding them towards something else, or they are that secret hand because there must be something nefarious about them. If you know, I'm not sure you ever listened to Zappa beyond the first album or two,
Yeah,
because
right.
he only makes reference to things from the first Mother's album. But
That's true.
uh, well, he makes passing reference in a quote of somebody else to the Absolutely Free album, or We're Only in It for the Money, which is the one where he's making fun of the hippie culture.
Yeah, Zappa hated hippies. He
Right.
didn't do
But
drugs.
yeah,
Like,
yep. And it's almost as though he never really claimed to.
right.
Now, if you look at that first album, he identifies with the freak movement. And then he
Yeah.
pretty quickly got sick of it when it caught on. So, and McGowan basically tells this story, but then acts like it's very weird that that
Yeah.
Zappa had two different takes on it.
Well, you understand Zappa's father worked at Fort Detrick, Edgewood
Right,
Arsenal. He was making
exactly.
poison weapons.
When Zappa
And
was like 5,
yeah.
and so 5-year-old Zappa was brought into a room with his dear old man, take your kid to work day, and was taught the ways of the family business of MK Ultra engineering, you know?
I mean, I have to assume it was on his 13th birthday, you know.
Right.
Son, it's time to learn what we
Well, no,
do.
because by that time they had moved to California. Because this is the thing, is like I know about Frank Zappa's life
Yeah,
because I've been a fan of him for a long
right.
time. And I agree with you that I wouldn't want to be in his band either. Somebody asked me that, like, you know, I was talking about Zappa to somebody that didn't know that much about him, and they're like, "Oh man, imagine if you could go back in time and like be in his band." I was like, I wouldn't want to be in Zappa's
Yeah,
band,
no,
man.
never.
I'm an extremely lazy musician. I would not.
Dude. Likewise, like I'm much more of an artist than I am a musician. Like I've always been like good at improvising and like doing things in a weird idiosyncratic way. Always been able to make my stuff happen, but I've never been as technically proficient as a lot of the people around me. And like, absolutely not. I would never want to have any of those jobs, session musician, like any of that shit. Like
And I'm
seems
really
awful.
impressed by people that can,
Oh
and
yeah,
but that's their job. And it's really funny
that's
because
their job.
he singles out the Wrecking Crew, and he's just like, all right, so if you really believe there's a hidden hand here, wouldn't the Wrecking Crew be the people that you'd be looking at, or the producers of the albums, or the people putting the money up for it? Like, why do you think the faces themselves, the public faces, are the ones worth examining so much if you just keep coming up short? You keep finding these really stupid things to point out that are just products of how the music industry works, or how drug culture works, or how networking works.
Yeah, I think this has to be like the psychic residue from Program to Kill. Like he's just looking. It seems like the military family connections is like really the thing that's getting his goat.
Right.
Because it is so spurious, and he hangs so much on it. It's just like, yeah, like for
Which
whatever
again,
reason,
all baby boomers. I
yeah,
can't belabor this enough. They're all
yeah,
baby boomers. Of course, they all had military in their family.
yeah. It's
But speaking of family ties, this is one of my favorite parts of the book, is bloodlines. This is something he talks about. The bloodlines, the deep family lore. Like Peter Fonda's great 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 granddaddy gave David Crosby's great 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 granddaddy a ride over here in the 1600s. Really makes you think, doesn't it? No, it doesn't, Dave. It doesn't. It doesn't
yeah,
actually mean anything to me.
yeah.
I had another section in here, dog-eared, about the Beach Boys, where he says, the story of the Beach Boys begins in the 1700s when the Wilsons made their way over into New York. No, it doesn't, Dave.
No, it doesn't.
All
Come
right,
on,
you
man.
know what? Let's take this a step further. The story of the Beach Boys begins at the tail end of the Paleozoic era, when the first animals crawled onto land and became terrestrial. And that's why so many of the early Beach Boys songs were about the surf.
Yo, I can't wait till these
Makes about
fuckers.
as much sense, right?
Yeah, I can't wait till these fuckers realize that my my 11th great grandmother and 10th great grandfather were both tried and convicted as witches in Salem. And in fact,
Wow.
yeah.
Yep.
And what's more, me, the other singer-songwriter in one of my folk bands, and the violin player, same grandma, same 11th grandma. We all got witch
What?
blood. That's why we sing so pretty. Yeah. At least I
Oh.
think so. It's the same last name, and I did about as much ancestry.com research as I think McGowan would have. And I
Well, if
have
the
to
three of
imagine
you
because
sing a
it's
tritone, it'll probably open a portal or something.
like we've definitely fucked up some harmonies when we were drunk, but
The devil's chord. Do it.
yeah, yeah. And in fact, the last person pardoned by the state of Massachusetts in 2018,
Oh.
Elizabeth Johnson, I believe. Yeah.
Huh. I remember reading about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wow.
Weirdly enough, it's
So
through my mom's side of the family, and she didn't even realize she had family from here. She was from New Jersey. Like she
hmm.
had no idea she had family from New England. Yeah. Turns out it's the same. It probably related to dudes I ended up in a band with, and
Hmm.
they were witches.
Yep.
Really makes you think.
Makes you think.
It does, yeah.
Sequoyah Kennedy, Luciferian musician.
A fucking Kennedy too.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah,
God,
got the Kennedy ties.
it's
Um,
crazy.
yeah. Okay. So speaking of that, another dog-eared section is the Hollywood connections at the time, because it's really weird to Dave McGowan that people living in Laurel Canyon were mixing it up with the younger people of North Hollywood, which Laurel Canyon's just north of North Hollywood, I think, right?
I think
Like
so, yeah.
Hollywood kids, the young Turks of Hollywood, as he calls them, all have these weird connections. Like Peter and Jane Fonda, their father, Hank, was in World War II and worked with the OSS in World War II. He was also, Dave doesn't mention this, but Henry Fonda was also one of the great actors of old Hollywood. He was in a lot of classic movies. Like the Fondas are a Hollywood dynasty,
Yeah.
Dave doesn't deign to mention that, the Fonda name carried some weight in Hollywood.
Right.
He just thinks it's weird that these kids were all mixing it up in Laurel Canyon and helped to create the music scene by their presence at the venues and made movies like Easy Rider and all that. It's just amazing to me. I'm like, you didn't care to mention that they're part of a Hollywood dynasty family. Like that's why they were famous. Like they had a leg up in that regard. It's just really weird that you're
Yeah.
focusing on Henry Fonda's World War II career. And it brings me to my favorite part because he goes into this whole list of all of the young Turks in Hollywood at the time, and he's talking about Nancy Sinatra, whose dad Frank had all these mob connections, and you're like, wait, so the mob's part of this too? I guess I don't know. And Jack Nicholson, the Jack Nicholson isn't real conspiracy.
Oh my
Is what
fucking
I
god!
took from this.
I forgot about that.
Jack Nicholson was faked, like the moon
Jack Nicholson was
landing.
faked. Yeah, Jack Nicholson doesn't exist.
That's what
That's some other guy.
That's what the room 237 thing really is. It's like Jack Nicholson is as fake as the moon landing. So he goes into this whole thing about that everybody knows. I mean, people have heard this story before, but for people who haven't, around the time Chinatown came out, he was asked in an interview how he felt about the plot of that movie in relation to his own story, where his sister growing up actually turned out to be his mother, and he was
Right.
raised by his grandmother, who he believed was his actual mother, right?
Yeah.
And so it was, and he found this out in the course of an interview when he was 37 years old. That's crazy. Like
That's
that's
crazy.
gotta blow your mind and destroy you.
Yeah.
But later, McGowan says that nobody's ever seen Jack Nicholson's birth certificate, so he may as well not exist.
He's fucking Jack Nicholson birther?
Yes, he was a Jack Nicholson birther. Now, one might think that these two stories are related. If you have a teenage or a young daughter who's having a child out of wedlock and you secret her away so that she can come back with a baby and you can pretend it's your own baby, you might not want a record of that hanging around. There might have been ways to avoid having a record of that.
Might cross your T's, dot your I's a bit. That's what they made paper shredders for. We don't use them anymore. We've forgotten the magic of the paper shredder. You shred it up, you throw it in the fireplace. It's cathartic.
But there's no birth certificate. He's basically a ghost. It's maybe he was manufactured from birth. I don't know.
I mean, you know. No, because he can only be Jack Nicholson.
Right.
Right? Like, well, maybe he's a robot then. If he's just the Jack Nicholson bot.
Well, how come he's aged then?
Clones.
I was going to say that he was just AI generated, and like Roger Corman was the one that actually invented AI image generation back then. And that's why, Jack appeared in those movies because they were less high profile. I
can see it.
Yep.
I could see it.
It was all stuff invented, and Roger Corman was part of it. Now, I'm going to mention that David McGowan never mentions Roger Corman, who was kind of instrumental in bringing, the Nicholson and Fonda and Dennis Hopper into the public consciousness. But
yeah, yeah, man, I think that's that more than anything. There is there's so many interesting stories within the stories he collects in this book, but like he
Yeah,
never makes them interesting. And like, the other thing is like, it's like I'm not about to sit here and say like, um, that there's nothing going on with like plots and like murders that were reported as other things and stuff, and like, but it's like this isn't it. Like the plot you're describing, like I'm fully down to believe and hear about some plots that are going on in this scene, but you're not hitting the notes.
yeah, he's not hitting any notes. You
Yeah.
know, he's if anything, he's hitting the brown note. I mean, he's just he's just flailing around, and I think this book would be better if he took some wild leaps of logic and actually accused people of something wacky and crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's bring aliens into it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Let's
Yeah,
bring
yeah,
like
yeah.
directed energy weapons and death rays and like why not? Just do it. Like
Speculate.
pull the trigger on that shit, man. Speculate wildly and give us something really entertaining to read because you
Yeah,
didn't do it.
don't sit in this middle zone. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's unfortunate.
because the main thing that this hinges on too is that Lookout Mountain Observatory.
Right.
It looms large in this story, and we haven't mentioned that yet. And I was going to say Roger Corman probably worked there, and that's where he developed the AI to
Right, right,
create
right.
what we know as Jack Nicholson. But
Right, right.
the so he describes Laurel Canyon as being kind of remote, off the beaten path, and surrounded by nature. And he thinks it's really weird that there's a secret military installation there. And he thinks it's really weird that people that want to live in a commune style, free love, nudist, probably drug ridden environment would also want to live because it's secluded, man, because it's out of the
Yeah.
way. That's why both of
Yeah.
those things existed there, because they both wanted to be hidden.
Yeah. That's the closest place you're gonna be hidden close to a population center.
Right.
Like,
And then
no,
he admits that the only documented use for like Lookout Mountain is a place where they filmed. They had an elaborate filming studio and equipment facility there, and film processing and film archiving, which he said was mostly used to store films from atomic bomb testing. You know, and then spends the rest of the time not actually speculating about what they did at Lookout Mountain, but
right,
just kind of pointing at it, being like,
right.
"There's that fucking place over there, man. Something's
I
going
was
on over
waiting,
there."
I was waiting to hear some juicy stuff. I was like,
Right?
oh yeah, this is what I'm here for. Like, let's get, and it just never happens. Instead,
Yeah,
it's yeah,
yeah. I mean,
David Crosby being sus.
David Crosby being kind of an asshole is.
Yeah, man, we know. Like, that's a known ass thing, dude.
But yeah, maybe the reason he was the first person to talk about Lookout Mountain Observatory is because it just wasn't that interesting.
It might not have
Maybe
been.
maybe there wasn't really. Now, I could think of a use for a military installation with a giant studio and movie filming facility within it, being that close to Hollywood, especially during wartime. I could think of a really good use for
Mm,
that. It's it,
yeah,
it's called propaganda.
yeah,
And we know propaganda exists already. Like there's cartoons where Donald Duck's making bombs for the Nazis and shit. Like
right.
so at every point that he tries to tell you there's something there, there is absolutely no there. There's nothing to look at. He's
The
just waving, hand waving, and you're like, oh, okay. What do you got to show me, Dave? A whole lot of nothing again. Oh, okay.
it's nothing to us because we are literally in the pool that he is calling weird. Like this is a man realizing that there is a side of culture that is dark,
Hmm.
unfortunate, and has produced a lot of great art. And he's like that. that is the thing that connects all of these stories. It's just that they're a part of a culture that McGowan didn't realize was there. And instead of just like realizing it like a normal person, he wrote a fucking book about it. But that's all he's doing is saying like, well, yeah, look at all these houses burned down, all these people died. Like, isn't there's something there that connects all this? And it's like, yeah, man. Yeah, there is. It's really complex. Like it's a fucking it's the nature of history and economics and class and fucking the
Art.
bomb and all this shit. Like, yeah, there is something there.
Yep. It's a confluence of many things.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing that really bothers me is the one takeaway for me is like there's a whole lot of things Dave McGowan just couldn't wrap his head around. And chief among them, I think, is art. I think he was just utterly incapable of understanding art, why anybody would create art, what it takes to create art, and what kind of a lifestyle an artist would lead. I'm using art really broadly here. It includes music, it includes everything, you know.
Right.
He just doesn't get it. And if somebody like writes lyrics to something, it doesn't necessarily mean that's a deeply held core belief. It was lyrics they wrote once.
Right. It might not even have been a song they wanted to release. That might have been like that the label said, "Oh, we got to do this," you know.
Like taking a quote of Stephen Stills saying that he thought protest music was dumb and he didn't want to write a protest song after For What It's Worth. It's like, yeah, man.
Yeah.
Like that could mean a lot of things. I always took that to mean Stephen Stills is like, why the hell are you listening to me? I'm just a musician, man.
Yeah.
I'm not a politician. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not a pundit. I'm not a philosopher. I'm the guy that just wants to play guitar and get laid.
I mean, I think protest music is dumb, but from a purely artistic, it's like in the same way that I think musicals are dumb. Like I don't like the form. There's really technical reasons why I don't like that type of songwriting. That doesn't mean I don't like protest. It's just like as a musician and artist, it's like, yeah, I just don't think you should ever you should make something that timely or like that about like that on the nose. When something's too on the nose, it bothers me. But that doesn't mean like I disagree with the message or I think people shouldn't do it or listen to it. But I would certainly say I think protest music is dumb, even if and I probably have written protest songs in the past as a younger man.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to collect a ton of examples about how these guys didn't actually believe in they didn't believe uniformly in protest and the anti-war movement. And it's almost as though none of them in particular ever claimed that they did in the first place. It just Dave McGowan thought they all represented. To Dave McGowan, these people represented the anti-war counterculture, turn things on its head movement in that 60s era. And it slightly predated the San Francisco scene, so it informed all of that. So somebody must have created that because this is one of the major missteps in his logic too. This all occurred in a vacuum as far as he's concerned.
Right.
Everything that happened was just serendipitous and happened out of nowhere, and people showed up, and all of a sudden, overnight, Jim Morrison's a rock star. It's like, I think there were more steps than that, man. And he's not taking into account anything else that happened in the world outside of it. Like I never really thought of the Beach Boys as a counterculture band. I mean, there's overlap and stuff, but they were like more bubble gum and pop rock, you know. And they're great for what they are, but they're not. I don't think of them the same way I would think of like the Doors, certainly, but the Mothers, they're not. I mean, like I said, there's overlap. But my understanding of the Beach Boys was record companies were on the lookout for their own The Beatles.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't seem to realize that the British invasion posed a unique challenge to record industry types. And by 1966, 67, you had albums like Sgt. Pepper and Pink Floyd's first album, and like psychedelic stuff was popping off. So record companies were just, their heads were spinning, and they're like, who are just walk into any random club and whoever's playing, if it seems weird, just hire them, just sign them. Like, we'll make it work somehow because we don't even know what kids are looking for now.
And it's that we'll make it work part that seems to elude McGowan. The
Right.
fact that like that there was machinations that impacted how these bands were set up. Like they did put bands together. They did just take people and put them together. And it's like, yeah, those people came from a certain class of people because that's the connections that the record companies had.
Yep.
That's the pool they were choosing from was based on their, socioeconomic status and shit.
Yeah, I mean, if he had ever hung out with any musicians at all, he wouldn't even have to be one. Just get to know a few because it's
Yeah.
like, especially when you're young and, um, you know, you're reckless and maybe don't know how to play your instrument that well. You only know the three chords. Like these are just tropes. These are just like stereotypes that he seems to
Yeah.
think is really weird. But it's like I can think of tons of times I've been in a band and we had a drum set but no drummer. And it's
Yeah.
just like you just grab anybody. Like, hey man, can
Yeah.
you keep a basic beat? Like, give it a try. And you'd be willing to put up with somebody being kind of a bad drummer until they learned better because you just needed a drummer.
Yeah.
But to him, it's just so weird if somebody appears and like joins the band but didn't have experience before that. It's like, yeah, people learn on the fly, man. That's what they
Yeah,
do.
he's missing the human element too. The fact that
Yeah.
like
Some of
yeah,
it's just practical. Like, I don't know.
well, it's this all this shit like for like when you get like illusions shattered, and I see this with a lot of counterculture conspiracy theorizing.
uh
Not not all of it, and like again, like there is sus shit out there. You know what I mean?
mhm,
There, of course. Um, but it's like people get illusions shattered, and they can't just sort of accept that like they were that they just interpreted something wrong or that like uh
mhm,
that it might have just been nothing. It was just paper
right,
mache and it has to be enemy action at that point. It has like
right.
that because you it's an ego pride thing on a subconscious level, but it is. Eh, and it's the same thing with like yeah, man. And you know what? You could be a musician with no experience too.
Yeah.
Like you could do
Anybody
that.
can.
Anybody can. Maybe you need to be a different type of person. Maybe you need to be more of an idiot to do that, you know?
Yeah.
But like you could, and there's always an element of justifying, not just with McGowan, but with a lot of people, like justifying why they're not as cool as they think they should be along
Yeah.
these like nonsense lines that they've
Yeah.
decided to draw. Um, it's like, yeah, you could. And also, like,
Right.
if you do throw yourself into things, like serendipity will happen, synchronicity
Yeah.
will happen, and you will find yourself in weird places and doing weird things and like doing impossible things. Like that's as much as McGowan hates the word serendipity. Like, that happens. That happens, and
Right.
if you want to like get mechanical about it, it's because like when you start throwing yourself into situations, like there's all these possible ways things could go, but they eventually all those possibilities start getting chopped off and chopped off and chopped off. And it's
Mhm.
like he uses one story about like I think it was Neil Young and someone else in like a car, like seeing
Yes.
seeing a yeah.
I
And
was
it's
gonna
like
bring this up. Yeah.
yeah. Um if you have that like pulled up in your mental bank,
Yeah. It
like
was
maybe you should relate
Neil
it.
Young came down from Ontario to find Stephen Stills because they
Yeah.
already knew each other. Like Neil Young was in a band called the Minor Birds, which had broken up at that point with Rick James, weirdly enough. He was in a band with Rick James. Um,
That
um,
is
but
weird. I mean
yeah. So he drives down from Canada in a hearse with Ontario plates. So not exactly like inconspicuous. And he drives to LA looking for Steven Stills. This is the legend. Couldn't find him. Went up to San Francisco. Couldn't find him there. Came back to LA. And meanwhile, Steven Stills is in a car with somebody else driving. And he's like, "Oh my God, that's Neil Young." And they're on like the Sunset Strip in heavy traffic. And the driver just makes a U turn and then flags them down and they pull over and it's like a reunion. And they were
yeah.
talking about how serendipitous it was that they just happened to be passing each other stuck in traffic, like in the middle of a really populated area, like a popular area for the freak types in
Yeah.
LA. And now, okay, McGowan's whole thing is like anybody that's ever been in LA traffic knows that making that kind of a U-turn would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible. It's like, really, this is the thing you're going to nitpick here?
I know.
You're resting your case about how serendipity isn't a thing on the impossibility of taking a U-turn in LA. Like, like maybe like maybe they flubbed that a little bit, man. Maybe they just
Maybe it's a
maybe they just
fucking
said
story.
maybe it's a story they were telling. Like maybe it was just quicker than saying they had to drive down to the Ralphs and then turn around and then take a bunch of shortcuts so that they could come out behind him in traffic. Like,
Right.
it's just
Right.
shorter to say we pulled a U-turn and we
It's a
flagged
better story to say, yeah,
because
we
the
just
U-turn
banged
is
you.
not the point.
It's yeah. And like the impossibility of finding someone, it's like, no, dude, there's all these filters that select to end up in that place at the same time. Like there's all these, like that's where musicians are, that part of town. Like that's where, clubs and fucking whatever. That's the route you take to get to somewhere. And people of a certain profession, being musicians, might have a day job, and that day job happens to be in a certain industry, which ends up being, these people are on the same stretch of road at the same time. Like there's all these sorting mechanisms that just happen naturally from being a person. And like if you have any ounce of a spirit of adventure in you, you have had experiences that when you read McGowan's take on this, you're just like, bro, no, 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 like, dude, like that stuff happens like all the time, like literally all the time.
It's like it seems like he's really reaching for stuff, or he's just genuinely mystified by everything because he has had no life experiences. I'm really not sure which
Yeah.
it is, but it's like, did he
Or he
spend
has this,
all of his time updating his blog and never got
well,
out in the
updating his
sunshine?
blog and fucking and working his ass off,
Yeah,
like because as a conspiracy theorist, you absolutely have a day job, like,
he did.
and
He was a
you
general contractor, from
yeah,
what I understand. He remodeled like medical buildings.
yeah. So you don't have a life if you're doing
Mhm.
all that. Like you literally don't. Like you're some salt of the earth dude that's just like that, loves all this music, but then like goes into the trades early, isn't exposed to this shit. Like it,
Yeah.
you're on a track that you're actually just not in the scene.
Well, it's kind
And
of a
then
weird thing because I guess he had a master's in psychology. I found that somewhere, which is
really?
really weird. Really, I saw that online. It could have just been wrong. I don't know. Yeah, in preparation for this, I listened to like an over a decade old interview with him on Banal of America. Um, and this is when the book was kind of new, and I guess it was really only a couple months before McGowan died, or like not that long, like maybe a year before he died.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, I wanted to listen and hear his voice, to see if it softened my opinion of him at all, and not really. Like it didn't really move the needle either way.
Yeah.
And B, to get a sense of whether he was able to, in conversation, like flesh out any of this stuff or account for it any better. But in that, he described himself as a general contractor. So I don't know why. Is he kind of like Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse, where he has like a doctorate but wants to be a bouncer at the club?
Uh, there's all sorts of reasons why, like
Right.
you could have a degree, couldn't get work, or had a
Yeah.
family, had to support him by getting a better paid job than what you can get
Right.
with a master's in psychology, which isn't a lot. Like a master's in psychology, you ain't getting shit. Like
Right. He was
you need
probably
that
like a
doctorate.
social worker or something, and
Yeah.
then just decided he could make more money being a contractor. And
And
yeah,
100% make double the money,
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
harder. Um, yeah, yeah, there's an element of almost subconscious bitterness that runs through it, of just like, I wasn't able to. I loved all the stuff they did, but I thought they were better than that, and it
All
turns out
right,
they're
because
terrible.
yeah, he's very snarky too. Like he makes a lot of sarcastic comments. Some of them are sniping at the readers, like
Yeah,
basically saying like, "Oh, I know some of you are going to be mad about this because I'm attacking your hero," and it's like, well, I'm mad about this because you're a poor writer and you're really bad at having your ideas coalesce around an actual point. There's
yeah,
never a point to what you're saying.
deconstruct away. Like these are people, and a lot of people in the entertainment industry are not saints. Like,
right.
go for it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care
As
about
a fan of
that.
Zappa, I could say he was a terrible family man. He was an
Yeah.
asshole. There were a lot of really suspicious things. He was a philanderer. There were a lot of bad things about him.
Yeah.
But there's a bunch of his albums that I love.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of thematic things about him that I love. I can separate those things. They don't, I don't have to discard one or the other. But I find it offensive as a writer. That's what offends me
Yeah.
about this book.
Yeah. It's tough, man, because like it's one of the things like you get into, this does seem to be kind of a staple of like conspiracy theory about the counterculture, and
Yeah. Yep.
it's deeply unfortunate because like to it a lot of times it comes down to like, do you accept that things like serendipity exist, right? First, like,
Right.
honestly, and it's like, you know what, that's something you got to decide for yourself, I guess. Like, I don't know, because be perfectly honest. But no, you don't, because it does happen. Everyone knows it happens. And whether you have a materialist fucking worldview about it or you think it fucking means something, it still happens. It's either
Yep.
math or it's God, like whatever. And that's probably the same thing in the end of the day. So what are you going to do? Like,
And as you mentioned, it's like the free will plays into it too. So I mean, like people are choosing things, they're selecting for
yeah,
things. The waveform collapses on a point, and it may seem serendipitous, or it may be portrayed as serendipitous when you mythologize it later. But everything was actively moving toward there, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
acts like Laurel Canyon just kind of like appeared next to a secret military facility mysteriously one day, and it's like, no, man, a couple people moved there, started a commune, more people moved there, and then there were these freaks in town, and they made friends with the freaks, and then the freaks were there all the time. Like,
And it's like,
scenes grow organically. They
yeah.
actually do. Like, it's a thing that happens.
And we know the intelligence. I hate calling them the intelligence community, by the way. That's just like the
Right.
most ghoulish. Like, we know U.S. intelligence was fucking around with the counterculture. Like, we know that they had their
Right.
fingers poked. Like, that's well documented. Like, that's no joke. So why do you have to make this cartoon version of the thing that we already know? Maybe
Right.
it's like an inability to accept that like a lot of people. I feel like it would be hard for McGowan and people who share similar personality types to accept that like people like us can appreciate the art that comes out of a scene and understand the history and understand that those are two different things, in
Yeah.
terms of, right? Like, because
And
I can
that there
do
were a
that.
lot of
Like,
individuals involved, like individual
yeah.
people. Like a band is not. Uh, I've been in bands before. There's band people I have been in bands with that I will never speak to again.
Mm-hmm.
And
Likewise.
we had different points of view at the time, but we worked together as a band, and I have no need to talk to them ever because we had different worldviews, but we could
Yeah.
improvise together. It,
Yeah.
it was fine, like
The guilt by
just
association thing is
right,
is a particular pet peeve of mine because it's like, and you see this everywhere. It's not just in this book. You see this all over the damn
right.
place. And it's like, yeah, man, like before social media ran our fucking lives, like you didn't know everything about the people you knew at
And
all.
we were better for it, I
And we were
think.
better for it. Yeah. Because you
Yeah.
weren't guilty by association, because you just saw what you saw from that. But they had a whole ass life that you weren't privy to. And
Mhm.
like it's like saying that the experience of like, yo, I never saw that coming from that guy never happened, right? Like they
Right.
must have known everything they were up to, but it's like, no, that, and like people hide sides of their lives all the time. But this
Mhm.
guilt by association thing is like the sinew that ties so many conspiracy theories together. It's like, well, they
Right.
were, hanging out together at this time. It's like, okay, well, that might mean something. It might not. Like, it's not something you can hang your hat on.
Right.
It's just not a, yeah, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say Mama Cass had an open door policy at her house where anybody could wander in and take drugs or sell drugs or sleep on the floor or get laid or do whatever, and then think it's really weird that Charlie Manson was there sometimes.
Exactly. Fucking exactly.
Like, you just answered your mystery with another mystery, like,
For real.
or actually, it's the opposite of that. You just explained why a thing happened, then explained that the thing happened, and then said that that's suspicious as hell that that happened.
And that's what makes this book so frustrating. It's that shit. It's just like,
Yeah.
so what are you talking about?
I keep dumping sugar on the floor, and then ants keep showing up in the same spot where I dumped the sugar. It's weird. I just don't know what's happening.
I think someone's dumping ants in my house.
Somebody must be bringing the ants here.
Never seen ants before, you know?
It's just, I mean, laughably bad, but I'm sure you had the same experience as me. I mean, I don't know how it is with the audiobook, but just painful.
It's more painful because you can tell that the reader is having the exact same experience, but he knows
and
he
you
has to
don't,
do a job, so he doubles down on conspiracy voice.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hard. Yeah.
You really just want to put it down and then yell like into the
Yeah.
void, or
Yeah.
like
I
yell
like
into the book and
I
like hope
think
that Dave hears it on the other side. I don't know.
yeah. I mean, I feel I think my gonna open this PDF and see if I can run a quick search, but my favorite sentence in the book is I just search for
The James Taylor one.
James Taylor, dude. It is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of gold in there. I mean, there
There
was
really
one.
is.
He's talking about Lenny Bruce. He doesn't want to get too much into the Lenny Bruce's alleged suicide, which was shady as
Right.
hell. Then he says that the last recordings fell into the hands of like Phil Spector, who's sketchy as hell, and a guy called
Right.
Frank Zappa. And you're like, the recordings fell into the hands of a guy that had a recording studio? Weird. A couple of producers ended up with the recordings after Lenny Bruce died?
Well, but we've
Weird.
already established that they're sus, and the susness overwhelms their role, their function for some reason. It always
Like,
does.
how
This
did
is
he have his own business being a contractor? It's just like, well, I went into the hardware store to buy some nails, and then the man there tried to sell me nails. I don't know.
But that's how they act, though. That's how they act. They fly off the handle at the weirdest shit. You're just like, okay, man. Yeah, I get it. That's fine. Like you go into like a shitty towny bar at like 5 p.m. and you will hear this same logic applied to the man who sold them nails at the hardware store.
Yeah.
Yeah, this passage is just incredible. He
Okay.
goes, that was just one curious shift that occurred in the local music scene. The folk rock movement, as it turns out, didn't really last very long in its original incarnation. To the contrary, it quickly splintered into three distinct new genres: country rock, psychedelic rock, and the introspective singer-songwriter school of rock, most closely associated with former mental patient James Taylor.
Okay.
Yeah, man.
What's your takeaway from that one selection, Sequoyah?
He doesn't know how art works. Yeah, like, yeah, man. Dude was sad. He wrote some really sad songs, dude.
I mean, because also, like, there was a folk scene already in Greenwich Village and elsewhere
Yeah.
and all over the country, and like that Bob Dylan was a thing. And speaking of Bob Dylan, he went electric at the Newport Folk Festival. It's something that's well documented that people know about. And the British invasion was happening. So yeah, folk rock was going to splinter in a couple different directions because people were going to try different things. People that were in
Yeah.
the folk scene were going to try to stand out some way or another. And like, but I mean, yeah, Laurel Canyon wasn't the vacuum that McGowan thinks it is, but um, this raises a really important point: is that he talks a lot about mental illness, as almost as though if you've ever been declared mentally ill, had been committed, which it was a lot easier to get committed in the '60s, I think. I mean, if you were gay, you could get thrown into, for instance, if you were a woman that wanted to get a divorce, you could. I mean, speaking of the Kennedy family earlier,
Right.
like in Rosemary Kennedy was lobotomized for speaking out too much. Like, the mental health system was not really great in the 60s, but he seems to think if you've ever been in an institution, then you were probably MK Ultra while you were there. Because I guess every mental health facility was suspect then. But then he also seems to be targeting the victim because he's being so glib and sarcastic about it. Like that passage right there. The former mental patient James Taylor. It's like, I think there's more to James Taylor. I don't like James Taylor. Never liked his music. I don't give a shit about James Taylor, but that's like really not a fair way to frame the guy.
It's
like,
not.
If he
definitely got some heartbreakers, man. Like,
I mean, he had a whole chapter about Rocky Erickson, and the last sentence of the Rocky Erickson chapter is, he's a rare example of somebody to have survived that whole Laurel Canyon experience. And then he's like, and thus ends the Laurel Canyon death list. I'm like, but he didn't die. Why is he in there? He lives much longer. But mental illness is suspicious.
Like, yeah. Or it makes you somehow compromised, or it's weird because he treats it as another like the concept of mental illness, and I'm including addiction in there too, as yet another tentacle of this vague plot. And it's like, okay, like on a philosophical level, if you want to talk about like the concept of defining mental illness as like a tendril of the overarching, like, black iron prison that we've been building since, Sumeria and shit like that. And yeah. Like I can get behind, but he's not talking about that. It's the fact that James Taylor is mentally ill. It's enough to mention offhandedly there as just like another gotcha. And it's like, why? And
Dave?
It's like, like Jimi Hendrix, he found so much wine in his fucking lungs, but he wasn't known to drink that much. He probably didn't. He was probably just mixing shit. Realistically, he was 27, kind of young. I don't know.
Yep.
You really gotta learn how to do drugs earlier than that before you get exposed to like the drug scene and shit. And another thing is like, okay, we're both in New England, right?
Yeah.
Fentanyl, right? Fucking bad. It's really bad. And
terrible.
Yeah, and like,
I wouldn't do any drug from the street now.
Absolutely not. Don't do
everything now. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, don't. But being part of a certain scene or way of being, a way of moving through the world. If you are part of that way of moving through the world, a certain culture, I don't even want to call it a culture, just like a thing that you do with your time, going to bars, partying, whatever, from ages 22 to 40, right?
Yep.
Like, that is a threat to your life because something might happen that makes you do that causes you to decide to do something that you wouldn't normally do, and all of a sudden you've got a line of fentanyl up your nose and you're dead, right? Being part, like, that's,
I mean, you could get drugged.
you could, yeah.
Especially
like that could happen
women,
too,
like,
yeah. But
I mean, you could just run into an unstable person and get stabbed at the bar too,
100%.
Anything could happen because life is complicated and messy and sometimes serendipitous and sometimes tragic.
Yeah, and certain currents lend themselves more to one than the other. You got a
because
bunch
you're in that position more often. So a law of
Yeah.
averages says that you're going to be more likely to.
Yeah. And being a musician in your 20s, like with all this new money, being told that like that you're a star and all this shit, and you're around all these other amazing artists and shit. Yeah. Yeah, things get weird and bad and like shit happens. Cause like people can be kind of terrible sometimes. Just base level, kind of fucking terrible.
Yeah, and fame twists you.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I look back at who I was in my 20s and it's pretty embarrassing. It's like, I was kind of embarrassed by some of my 20s personality aspects. And if that was magnified and I was put under, a microscope on a public level, like I'm glad social media didn't exist when I was in my early 20s.
Dude,
I mean, I guess it
for
did,
real.
but it was a different thing, It was like I didn't really join any real social media until I was in my late 20s, I guess. And still, there's probably really embarrassing things I put up back then.
I'm
And yes,
embarrassed by who I was a year ago,
and I've been
like that's
committed
always been
before, so
true.
I guess I'm sus too, because I've been in a mental institution before.
Oh, bro, we're both so sus. We've
Yeah.
been sus. We're
part of the sus crew. Yeah.
What are you gonna
Well,
do?
I don't know. I can tell you one thing I'm gonna do is never read this book again.
Never
Because
again.
I bought it years ago, and I think mainly my frustration comes from disappointment from having heard about the book so
Yeah.
often from people that I respected. And I have to wonder, because I'm guilty of this, how many of them actually never read it? Because before I had read it, I had heard other people talk about it or seen it referenced. So in conversation, you'd say, "Oh, oh, well, wasn't there that book about like how the
Yeah.
counterculture was a psyop back then? You know that
Yep.
book?" And people would go, "Oh yeah, I've read that book." I wonder how many of them actually did, because I would invite people to actually just, I don't know, steal this book from somewhere and read one chapter of it and decide, yeah, like we're not exaggerating any of the dumbness in here.
No, we're really not. It's we're really not. It's insane.
But like younger podcasters and people these days, like I've seen his name and this title come up enough times that kind of set off alarm bells, and I'm like, you all realize this is very stupid, right?
Very stupid. And that doesn't mean that there's not plots to uncover within the material. It's literally just the book.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's not the questions. It's not any of that. It's just like this source is just straight up terrible.
Yeah, and like I said, if it had been a book where he's like, "Here's a bunch of crazy shit that happened in that scene that they don't talk about in the other books," like an expose or just something that was supposed to
Yeah.
be kind of salacious or sensationalized, I could probably get behind it,
I
and
mean,
that's
yo,
basically what it is. But he
Sinister
just wants
Forces is one of my favorite books of all time. You know what I
right,
mean? Exactly. Like
yeah,
that's that, like that's what that is, you know?
yeah,
It's the
right,
same damn thing.
yeah. He carved out a niche as a conspiracy theorist, so he has to kind of make it conform. It just has to. He has to always leave the door open and imply things that
And
don't make any damn sense.
which is because he has to sell copies, which is because of capitalism, which is the ultimate evil that he refuses to name throughout the thing.
Right.
It's it's a fucking
It's the
mess.
motivating
He's
factor. Yeah.
sus too. At the end of the day, McGowan is sus as fuck.
Well, he is. I mean, at least he wasn't killed for releasing this book, or was he?
Or was he?
So, are there really people that think like,
So what happened was
yeah,
I forget, I'm not gonna pull it up, but on his blog he revealed that he was like sent a comment was made on his blog, I believe, by an anonymous source that said like, "Oh, I bet you better put down those cigarettes, otherwise you might, get cancer really." In so many words, it was like, "Oh, otherwise you might get like a really weird type of fast moving cancer really soon. That's
hmm
gonna kill you." And it was like, implied from this comment that this was because of the truth that he uncovered, of the Boston Marathon bombing, which I went and I read that series of blog posts, unfortunately, and it made me extremely angry.
yeah,
Um, like, yeah, I mean, I don't even need to say any more than that. It's just like it made me extremely angry. And I'm someone that entertains conspiracies, but like I'm also someone from New England,
right,
I had a friend there.
yep.
That makes it sound like she got hurt. She didn't, but she had a really bad day.
That was traumatic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I
yeah,
remember that day. I was in Billerica, which is like, I don't know, 15 miles outside of Boston. It's not that
yeah,
close, but it's not that far. And I had coworkers that were worried about their friends that were working at it. And
yeah,
I saw like it was traumatic for people that were right around there.
yeah.
But I mean, everybody knew somebody that was kind of close to the event.
Exactly.
Like Because the Boston Marathon's a big deal. A lot of people go to that.
It's a huge deal. Yeah, no, my friend was a massage therapist who was she's from Rhode Island, but she was like working at the finish line on like on runners, and like, you know, the windows got fucking I'm sorry I keep swearing so much. I just get
That's
worked
fine.
up by by this stuff.
I'm surprised I haven't sworn more
Yeah.
talking about this one.
You know, she had the windows blown out in the business that she was working at. It was right at the finish line. And then
Right.
she had to, you know, deal with all that stuff. And like McGowan's over here saying that like they weren't real bombs, that they were just like noisemakers and smoke bombs, and that like the people laying on the ground were like actors who were brought in to pose like, bro. And
Yeah.
so then he has
It,
this comment like saying that like,
yeah.
you know, you know, you've gotten too close to the truth, essentially. You might get this fast growing cancer because you smoke cigarettes. And then like 2 weeks later, McGowan reveals that he does in fact have an extremely aggressive form of cancer that is going to kill him, and it does. Like he died from this, you know, honestly fucking tragic uh disease, like probably
Yeah.
because he worked in removing asbestos from hospitals and stuff. Like that's probably why.
Yeah.
And
Asbestos will do that to you for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes okay. Either
But he died on the 55th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. So
serendipity.
that, yeah. But go on. I'm sorry.
I say as I'm wearing the KLF hat. Oh my
Yeah.
God. I am going to hell if it exists. And I like I don't, because the thing is I do have a sympathy for this man too. Like I truly do. I have a sympathy
Right.
for a lot of people. So like this does suck. But like the thing is, I get that because I can't believe that, like, because it's like either he was killed with some sort of cancer gun or poison or whatever. I mean, it's
Yeah.
possible. It is possible for the thing that the story seems like he was got for, which is that he got too close to the truth about this sacred cow, the Boston Marathon. Or McGowan was so convinced that he was right about his whole thing that he tried to stage a magic trick to
Mhm.
to galvanize interest and investigation into everything. He tried to galvanize his readership to really dig into the stuff that he had been writing about because he knew he was right and he was on a crusade. It's one of those two things.
Yeah, it's just kind of like
Yeah.
his last gasp of attracting interest to these stories, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
To
yeah.
try and do in his mind a heroic act.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's deeply
Or
unfortunate.
yeah. Or, you know, he did it for the lulls.
I think he
He
was a
was
true
so committed
believer.
to the bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish he did it for the lulz. Like that'd be funny. Um, especially with the 55th anniversary of JFK.
Right.
Although you ever notice the number stuff, it's not as airtight as they say it is, you know?
What number
And
stuff?
just like the number synchronicities around things, you know, pointing to
Oh,
dates and stuff, number magic. Because like,
but it's always terrible.
uh,
I mean, he does it
why?
a couple times in this
Oh
book.
yeah, he loves it. He loves it. People
You were
love it.
saying about the Luciferian stuff, like
Yeah,
there's always a date of occult significance, like Crowley's birthday, and
yeah,
you're
yeah,
like,
yeah. The
why? Who
equinox.
cares? Who cares about Crowley's birthday? Why is that significant? Or you would say like just a couple days shy of Halloween. You're like, well, then that's not Halloween, man.
Right. But you know what they never say?
What?
They never say that JFK was shot a day before the 23rd. Why wouldn't JFK have been shot on the 23rd of November, considering the Kerry Thornley connections to Lee Harvey Oswald? Like there's a strong Discordian connection to the
Yeah,
JFK assassination. Why did JFK get killed on the 22nd?
it's a good
Riddle me
question.
that. It's
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's it bothers me. I want it to be a day later. That's more fun. But
Well, I mean, if you
fuck.
get into the number magic thing, there's a certain symmetry to 1122.
That's
right?
You know what? Good point. Good point.
And people always talk about doubles of numbers, heightening the significance of it, so like, yeah. I mean,
but wouldn't you want to? That makes it the case even stronger, because then, as you're creating this, fracturing point in American history, which JFK assassination was, like things done changed after that, right? And
yep.
you've got this perfect opportunity to take that number symmetry thing, like 1122, and then break it, and break it in such a way that it lines up with the Discordian number. Like that would be a much more powerful, magical way to go about it. I would think,
But that predates the discovery of the significance of 23, I think.
I think the 23 Enigma comes from Burroughs whenever he wrote that.
It does, but it wasn't really
was it after
popular.
63? Yeah.
Well, Burroughs originated it, but it
Yeah.
wasn't widely known really until Robert Anton Wilson wrote about it
For sure.
later in the 60s. So, I mean, the 23 Enigma, as it were, I think Wilson writes about that. Yeah, like late 60s. So, I mean, it would have been after the fact. But
yeah, but these guys can control time. What are you talking about?
yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, law of fives, man. It's like the
Yeah.
Discordian law of fives, the 555, the 55th anniversary of 1122,
True.
63. Yeah. Well, I have thought about that, and I think there is evidence that 22 is a uniquely sinister number.
Mm.
So I think there's references in Kenneth Grant's books about 22 being associated with some kind of other dimension populated by demon clowns or something like that.
Of course. Well, it's the 22
And,
paths on the Tree of Life and the 22
right.
letters in Hebrew language. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's that.
So it is sus. Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
But this is where you run into danger too, because I mean, I think McGowan, there's one good thing you can say about it is that he doesn't go into synchromystic territory, which I think
Not really, no.
I love synchromysticism, and it sucks because so much of it out there is so bad. It's just
Yeah.
bad. Like, so much
Yeah.
of it is just terrible. People get really obsessive with it. And for me, I just love noting it, it's something you have to look at peripherally. It's something in the corner of your eye, right? It's not the focus.
It's a
You just
game you
notice.
can decide to play.
Yes, and you can
Yeah.
opt in or you can opt out. You can change the
Yeah.
rules.
Mm-hmm.
But when you try to impose order upon something like synchronicities, serendipity, magic, weirdness, as soon as you're trying to impose the order on it, and this is the whole Discordian motif, you lose your goddamn mind.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knows it, but you.
Yeah.
So,
It's not something that can be. It's a concept I've been working on a little bit. Is like the idea that, like, which isn't new at all. It's is essentially acausal. Like there is the magical side of life, which includes like dreams and weird time stuff and all this stuff. I mean, it's essentially acausal. It is essentially non-rational. It's the yin side to the waking world's yang side. And like rationality is a thing, and is a thing that can only be applied to that waking material side of life. And there's a whole other half of it that if you try to approach through these like hard definitions and stuff, you will go crazy. Yeah, it cannot be approached that way.
yeah.
What are you gonna do? You can't do anything is what you're gonna do. Like it's literally you can't deal with it.
Yeah.
So you just have to not deal with it. And it's fine.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I like reading sometimes these kinds of books, like conspiracy books. Like I said earlier, like Jim Keith.
Oh, I
It's
love it.
almost
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you take it's almost like hopping in a time machine because you're like, oh, right, like this is like 90s conspiracy theory. Like this is crazy. Like I remember when this shit was around. And
Yeah.
but it's weird when you have to adjust your mindset. You're like, oh yeah, like anything occult is immediately suspicious to a lot of these
Right.
guys. Like
Right.
Like I forgot about that. Like that it's weird to think that way. And but like we said with the serendipity and everything we've been explaining so far, it's just so bizarre. If people like you and I who mess with the stuff, we have fucked around and found out about synchronicity and magic and all kinds of things.
Certainly on the other side of finding out. You know what I mean?
So,
it happens.
so it's just amazing that like him talking about Neil Young and Steven Stills passing each other in traffic and
Yeah.
how impossible that U-turn would have been. He's dissecting it like it's the Zapruder film. Oh, I suppose they just ended up there out of serendipity. Like,
Yeah.
all right, man.
Yeah, come
You're
on.
really just barking up the wrong tree. That's
And
not
the
even a
thing is,
tree. That's
like,
a telephone pole.
it's not like any like it, it's not like even when McGowan was writing this, like he couldn't have just like called up an occultist who is like very clear about like, hey, I do this shit, like I'm kind of the guy to talk to about this stuff, like none of them do that. They
Yeah,
won't just like ask someone who knows something about a thing they don't know about, and I
yeah.
get it, like there's a lot of like
Assumed from the outset that it's all evil. Like it's all
exactly. They assume they
Luciferian.
know it, and anyone involved is suspicious and shit. And it's a
Right.
really great excuse to just keep a good boogeyman alive.
Right. Like, I mean, there's one part in here where Elvis comes up and he spends a page talking around Elvis, and then he gets to
Yeah.
oh, this is just a digression anyway, but I don't really have that much to say about Elvis. I don't think there's I'm like, really? You got no weirdness around Elvis? Like nothing
Come
weird
on.
about Elvis. You couldn't
Nothing.
find anything? And he vaguely mentions like the Elvis is alive theories, and then says that he Jim Morrison was known to read books by Blavatsky. And you're like, and oh right, that's what it is. That's the sus part is that he
Yeah.
sometimes read occult books. Like I don't the presence of Blavatsky's name here is supposed to be menacing to me. And what does that have to do with government and mind
Yeah.
control and how do you tie this together? Like what rubric are you using? I just
And the thing is, you can, like, you for sure can, but he
you
doesn't know
can.
how,
No.
It's
Yeah, I mean
really, it's
there's
a lot more complicated.
yeah, I mean there's that old phrase like show don't tell,
Yeah.
you know, and he's
This
just
is all
like
show.
all show, but it's not even really showing, it's just pointing at stuff.
Yeah.
Look at that. Look
Yeah.
at that. Look at that over there. And you're like, okay, well, I assume you have a whole chapter where you wrap this all together, right? Nope. Nope. I, I stand corrected.
Yeah.
So okay. Well,
I don't
I think
know.
at this point we've thoroughly demolished this
We
book,
have we have
and
thoroughly. I'm so ready to never think about this book ever again.
I know this has been cathartic. I'm like
It has.
I've been wanting to rant about this book for a long time, and then when you mentioned that you had been listening to the audiobook version, I was like, oh man, that book. And I talked to you a little bit. I'm like, great, Sequoiah's on the same page as me. He's probably mystified right now, just trying to be like, this book can't be as stupid as it is, right? Like,
Yeah, well, because I had heard you like talk shit about it way earlier, and then I was like, you know what, like I think I was talking to someone about like Program to Kill or something. I was like, I should engage with the man's work.
right.
And that was the audio. I was like, yeah, screw it, like let's give this a try. Spend an Audible credit. And I just immediately was just like, oh my God, AP he was just exactly correct about this.
Yeah. I was so I mean I had to reread this in preparation for this, and I listened to an interview with the man, and I will be very glad to just you know get it out of my head. I need some I need some I don't know, military grade acid or something to just
Mm.
rinse it out. So, but yeah, like I said, I couldn't have asked for a better person to talk this through with because I feel like you have a unique perspective and head for this kind of thing. And
Thanks, man.
I'm sorry you can't can't find that red pill that's going to take you there.
It's not going to happen for me. At this point, I know. I've accepted it. But thanks you so much for having me on. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was a blast.
Despite the subject matter, it was an absolute blast.
Yeah. So what are you up to these days? Is there places where people can find you, or are you being hermity?
Well, you can find me. I'm posting a lot of photography on Instagram. I've been working a lot. We'll have more to say about stuff I'm working on soonish. And yeah, like I'm on social media, but I'm just like not on social media at the moment.
Right.
I'm trying to just like not be until I'm like promoting something because I just don't. It doesn't feel good anymore, and so I throw up photos on Instagram and stuff from time to time. Yeah.
And you're still doing music and living your life and stuff.
Doing music, working on some other audio things. Yeah. I'll have more to say about that. Yeah, for right now, you can find me on social media. Yeah.
All right. We're in touch anyway, so
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Stay safe out there.